podcast. I am here today with my co-host, Leah Allen. Hello, Leah. Today we have a very interesting episode, and I'm allowed to say that because we're going to be talking about an article that I recently published with Rebecca Fouché. The article is titled Associations Among Chronotype, Big Five Personality Factors, and Sensation Seeking in Two Adult Samples. In this episode, we will dissect the article and we will introduce the topic, explain the methods, and finally share some conclusions of what Rebecca and I have found during these studies.
Yeah, so to start off with, we need to understand what a chronotype is. So a chronotype is essentially whether you are naturally a morning person or naturally an evening person. It is considered your built-in circadian preference. Some people naturally want to wake up early, while some people want to go to bed early. Others prefer staying up late and sleeping in. This isn't just necessarily a lifestyle choice, but it's been extensively studied across medicine, genetics, and psychology.
And for our studies, we decided to look at chronotype and how it connects to personality, and specifically the big five personality factors, and later on also sensation seeking as a personality trait. So researchers have found or they have discovered fascinating links between when you prefer to be awake and your personality traits. They have used different personality assessments and they found some interesting patterns. They have found that morning people tend to score higher on conscientiousness and extraversion. They're often more organized, disciplined, and socially outgoing. Age also plays a role, with older individuals more likely to be morning types.
I find that so interesting because I think about my grandma. She's not a morning person. No, she gets up around 11 noon, goes to bed at 2 in the morning.
Wow. So she is like, her evening clock is just so primary that
Yeah.
her age doesn't even matter.
Yes. So evening people, on the other hand, tend to be more open to new experiences. They're also more likely to exhibit traits like impulsivity, sensation seeking, and even aggression. Some research has linked the evening chronotypes to mood disturbances.
Correct. And why is this important? Why does this research matter? Research obviously is done oftentimes for people to just discover new connections to because they're interested in certain topics. But this research can help us understand that our sleep-wake preference aren't just habits that we follow. They are connected to fundamental aspects of who we are. The studies used both comprehensive personality tests and also shorter instruments like the 10-item personality inventory. I've also used that one in our study. And it has proven useful across various fields from academic performance to criminal justice research.
So, would you like to elaborate kind of how you guys structured your paper and your manuscript, and kind of like how our audience can expect us to continue on breaking down your paper?
Of course. So we started a while ago as part of my bachelor thesis or just an extra class to get more research experience. We started a study on chronotype and personality. Initially, Rebecca Fouché was interested to see if your time of birth was connected to your chronotype. So she theorized that people who were born like in the middle of the night would tend more to be evening people, whereas people who were born more in the morning hours would tend to be more morning people. So initially, we started up a project where we asked about people's time of birth, but we noticed that people were kind of guessing, like, oh, well, I guess I was born somewhere between this and this. So we didn't really have strong data to conduct further research with the time of birth. Like, we would have to access birth records to be able to really do that. But then we noticed some interesting patterns with the other personality traits because I was interested in the personality side of it. Later on, we decided to replicate the same study, but we would not ask about the time of birth, but only the personality side. And we would then ask for sensation-seeking personality traits also. The reason we did that is because personally, I'm very interested in the criminal justice system and criminal behavior. And we noticed in the literature that sensation-seeking traits were often linked to criminalistic behaviors. So we thought that doing a study on this might be a good bridge towards eventually being able to do that research within the criminal population. So that's kind of how the second study started. And so we combined the two studies into one manuscript. We wrote all of the methods, participants, procedure, and results of each study, and then we concluded with a general conclusion. So that's how we're also going to do the podcast today. We're going to go over study 1, how we conducted that, study 2, how we conducted that, and then a more general conclusion, what we found in both studies. I hope that is clear enough.
For sure. Thank you for explaining that. So, as you mentioned, your study 1 examined the relationships between the Big Five personality dimensions and chronotype preferences, meaning morningness or eveningness. And you guys hypothesized positive correlations between conscientiousness, extraversion, and morningness, with a negative correlation expected between conscientiousness and eveningness.
Yeah, and that was more so from the previous literature because we saw those patterns in different studies as well. We figured if they seen it, then we're expecting to see that also. In the first study, we had 219 adults recruited through social media platforms. It was a total of 146 women, 49 men, 2 non-binary, and 22 did not report their gender. The mean age was 33.52 years old with a standard deviation of 13.75. I don't know if people care about that, but it's always good to report. And
did you intend on recruiting such like a young population, or was that just by chance that it just happened to fall within that like early?
It was by chance. Yeah. So we asked around in our personal networks, and well, I was, of course, still am young, so my network consists mostly of younger people. And then people who use social media platforms typically are on the younger side. And especially because we also posted in like the research exchange groups on Facebook and LinkedIn, you often see more students, whether it's master's, bachelor, or PhD, but you see those types of people on there. So it was by chance that we had this young of a group. But I was surprised to have 219 people that responded to the survey because I thought that was kind of a lot.
Yeah, a good number.
Yeah. In this study, we also asked them to self-report their chronotype, so to identify themselves as an early bird or night owl. That's how we refer to it in the study. And out of the 159 people that self-reported, 69 identified as a morning person, 78 as a evening person, and 12 were uncertain.
So within this first study, you had your participants take the 10 item personality inventory, the TIPI, and the Lark Owl chronotype indicator, the LOCI. Do you want to dive in a little bit and explain what each of those assessments are?
Sure. These two we also used in the second study. So we try to keep it as similar as possible. And the 10 item personality inventory is just a short measure to measure the big five of personality. The reason it was created is because oftentimes you see that personality tests are very extensive. They're very long and they take a long time to just to take for a person. And this measure was created so it's shorter, it's easier to administer, and people won't be as distracted or bored or whatever. um and so it looks at the big five of personality using a 7-point Likert scale. So that gives you a pretty good range of where you could answer, and then you kind of score them by twos. So for each personality trait, you have 2 questions linked to that personality trait. And for every question, there's also one reversed answer. So then you take the average of those two, and that is then your score on that specific personality trait. So the higher you score, the higher you are within that personality trait. The Lark Owl chronotype indicator, I call it Loki, but it's the loci. It has 37 items, and it really measures your chronotype, whether you're a morning person, an evening person, or propensity for sleep debt. So it also looks at how sleep deprived is someone. This was
Highly sleep I am.
for me, I'm pretty solid. This was rated on a 6-point scale instead of a 7-point, but it was very divided. You had 13 items on morning scale, 13 items on the evening scale, and then 12 items on the sleep debt scale. They were in a random order, so it wasn't first morning, then evening, but it was just random, so you couldn't really see what the order for that was. So those two were the main questionnaires that we used. In the first study, we also did other types of questions, but that was not related to the personality. And of course, we asked some demographic questions like where are you from, what's your age, what's your gender, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we're gonna jump kind of into the key findings for your study, and
Mm-hmm.
you kind of had some correlations that you guys found between chronotype and personality.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of just go through these correlations that you found and like were they significant, positive, negative, etc. Just kind of
Yeah.
an overview.
So we found indeed some correlations, and we used a Spearman's Rho for that. Um, we found that morningness was positively correlated with conscientiousness, emotional stability, and extraversion. This would mean that morning people, are more conscientious, are more emotionally stable, and are more likely to be extraversion or extroverted. This is not a comparison between morning and evening. So in this correlation test, it does not mean that these people are more likely to be conscientious than evening person. That's not what this says. This just shows that people who are morning people are more likely to be also conscientious or emotionally stable or extroverted. We also saw a negative correlation with eveningness and conscientiousness. So this would mean that people who are evening people are less likely to be conscientious. We thought it was pretty interesting to see, and it did have similar results as previous research, so we were very happy with those results. Then we did look at the differences between men and women on the personality. So we used the independent samples t-test for that to really look at the differences between men and women. And we found that men scored higher than women on extraversion and emotional stability, which is interesting because I just thought it was interesting to see that men are higher in emotional stability, but I guess somewhere it makes sense.
I feel like it kind of does make sense, just because women have to deal with a much more
Yeah,
severe hormonal fluctuation, and we all know that sometimes emotional, mental, mood, like all of that is highly influenced by hormonal patterns.
yeah. And I feel like sometimes women tend to be more aware of their emotional state. So they can, what we also suggested was that men were maybe too afraid to admit, like, oh, but I'm emotionally unstable, or oh yeah, I get upset very quickly. That was kind of a theory that we had maybe too. Um, Other than that, we also saw that women scored higher than men on agreeableness and conscientiousness. So they are more likely to agree and they are more likely to be conscientious than men, which good finding, but there's really nothing you can do with this. So what are the implications of this research? Um, the research shows that morning types exhibit greater conscientiousness, emotional stability, and extroversion, while evening types show reduced conscientiousness. These findings suggest chronotype preferences reflect underlying personality differences rather than mere behavioral habits, with potential implications for understanding individual differences in circadian functioning. Later on, we'll go into a more of a deeper conclusion and implications, but this was just for like the first study.
Yeah, awesome. So, as you mentioned, that kind of concludes the first study. So, we're going to go into your second study. So, while previous research has established relationships between personality and chronotype and personality and criminality, no studies have directly examined chronotype and criminality connections.
Yeah,
Evening types demonstrate traits associated with criminal behavior, including oh my gosh, disinhibition, sensation seeking, and impulsivity. In addition, criminal populations, particularly men, exhibit elevated sensation seeking and impulsivity compared to non criminal controls, and this is cited throughout the literature. So
yes.
your second study aimed to replicate your study one findings, while incorporating a sensation-seeking measure to examine potential chronotype prevalence and criminal relevant personality profiles. And yours and your co-author hypotheses included: one, replication of study one, chronotype, big five correlations, and two, evening types would demonstrate a higher sensation seeking scores compared to morning types. So, do you want to kind of take us through the breakdown of study two?
Yeah. So study two, as Leah said, we try to replicate as much as possible. So we did another online study, kind of the same media, social media platforms. We took out the stuff about time of birth that was in the first study, and now really focused on the personality, including sensation seeking, and the chronotype to kind of narrow it down. However, the outcome or the turnout of participants was a little bit less. We only had 83 adults that were recruited through social media. Out of these 83, 55 were women, 27 were men, and one was unreported. The mean age was even lower, it was 27 years. And out of the self reported chronotype, 28 reported to be morning people, 40 reported to be evening types, 11 said, I'm neither, and 4 were uncertain. In this study, we had the TP, the 10-item personality inventory, and the Lark-Owl chronotype indicator identical to study 1. However, we added the sensation-seeking skill. There are 4 skills on this entire questionnaire, but we chose 2. Namely, disinhibition skill and the thrill and adventure seeking subskill, because the other 2 weren't relevant for what we wanted to do, and you could still get valid scores with just looking at the subskills. So for this study, our key findings. Morningness also showed, again, positive correlation with conscientiousness and emotional stability. So even in a smaller sample, we still found these significant correlations, which was interesting because that does show that it's quite strong, that it shows in even a smaller population. Again, we saw a negative correlation between eveningness and conscientiousness, and we did find a positive correlation between eveningness and disinhibition. And for the people not sure what disinhibition means, disinhibition is a loss of behavioral control resulting in action or comments that are considered socially inappropriate, impulsive, or risky. So this means that morning or evening people are more likely to show traits of disinhibition, which is kind of what we expected to see. What we draw from that and this is for future research, is that we expect that there is a higher percentage of evening people within the criminal justice system than morning people, just based on these traits. We again looked at gender differences, and we saw that men scored significantly higher than women emotional stability and thrill seeking. So the thrill seeking we also expected. The emotional stability is identical to what we saw in the first study. We also looked this time at the differences between morning types and evening types. So remember, we did the correlation that just showed that morning people or evening people are more or less likely to exhibit these traits. But now we actually compared them, and it showed that morning types scored higher on conscientiousness than evening types. They also scored higher on emotional stability, but evening types scored higher on disinhibition than morning types.
So what does that kind of what kind of like implications can you draw from those comparisons that you did? Because you said you only did the correlations in study 1, and now
Yeah.
you're doing more of a comparison. So what kind of implications can you draw from these comparisons?
I guess for us it was just more to see if there were actually significant differences between the two groups. Because you saw in the correlation that one trait was correlated more strongly to evening types over morning types, but it didn't show if it was significantly different between the two groups. And that's why in this study, we did implicate the independent sample t-test to see if this difference was actually significant. So it was more also just curiosity from us to see if that was the case. But it does show that evening types score significantly higher in disinhibition, and that provides empirical support for theoretical links between chronotype and criminal relevant personality traits. As I mentioned before, like you see these traits within the criminal population, the disinhibition, and to see that disinhibition and evening types are strongly, significantly correlated, you might think like, oh, that could mean that within the criminal justice situation, there are more evening types than morning types. And we'll go into why that is important or could be relevant when we go to the discussion.
Yeah. So kind of taking these results from both of these studies, how does it align with previous research that's out there? And can you kind of like speak to, was there any like surprising findings that maybe has not been already kind of seen in the literature?
So we looked at a bunch of different literature, including research on chronotype and personality and criminal behavior or criminality, but none of the research tried to make that link between, okay, the chronotype profile fits criminality traits. So what we try to do, especially in the discussion, is to kind of make that bridge towards, okay, there has been research done on personality and criminality and personality and chronotype, but it isn't full circle yet. And maybe in the future, it could be interesting to kind of create that full circle moment of like, okay, now all these three factors are connected to each other. As we'll go into kind of the discussion on this, the yeah, should we go already into future directions or should we go more into okay? So what we try to get from this is you could hopefully, if the research is extensive enough, present compelling opportunities for evidence-based reform. Risk assessment tools could be developed that incorporate chronotype personality screening instruments for, let's say, pre-sentencing evaluations and parole decisions, providing more nuanced understanding of individual risk factors. Because if you know that a person functions the best during a specific set or time of day, why try to force this person now to do all these tasks during the morning when they function better at night, for example? And of course, society is very much built around this 9 to 5 kind of system. But to help people to go back from, let's say, a prison back into society, helping them in these ways might be more beneficial for their reform. These findings could inform recidivism prediction models through longitudinal studies, examining whether specific chronotype personality profiles predict reoffending patterns over time. Within correctional facilities, institutional management could be revolutionized by developing prison scheduling and programming that accommodates chronotype differences. So, as I mentioned, if they could create that in that system, it could be beneficial for the people in prison to help with their going back to society. The research also suggests promise for early prevention initiative, particularly school-based screening programs that identify at-risk youth through chronotype personality profile, enabling targeted interventions before criminal behavior emerges. So if you see that a child is very much going into the evening type profile with these personality traits, as a teacher or as a parent, you might be able to step in and adjust and help them to not fall into criminal behaviors that might come from that, if that makes sense. I know I like kind of splurred a little bit, but I hope I'm making sense with this. There's just so many different ways you could go about this. And that's the thing. It hasn't been researched yet or tried to be implemented yet. So we just don't know what the possibilities would be.
Yeah, so based on all of these conclusions, because like there are obviously significant conclusions, and
Yeah.
potentially like ways that can be utilized within the population. Um, what are the differences, or like what would you expect differences to be between like these more genetic variances versus just habitual um habitual patterns, because this is kind of like who you are naturally, but you can get into
Yeah.
habitual patterns where that almost feels natural even though it may or may not be.
Yeah. So there is a genetic predisposition to whether or not you're more of a morning person or an evening person. Some people, how hard they even try, they are just not morning people. And we do, as I said, live in a society where that is the case. And eventually, um, you could see that those types of people might go into jobs that require night shift work or that have odd hours because that fits better with their system. Um, so I think to kind of be able to help people where their natural patterns align with what they could do instead of trying to force people into this um, no, but you have to work a 9 to 5 job because that's the norm. um, I think to an extent people could make that their habit. But when you look at Becky, who was my co-author on this, she says she's a night owl. So she's always up. So even if she has to be up early in the morning because of work, she'll do that. But she'll also be up late at night getting stuff done because she can focus at night better. So that could then be a concern for other health issues because your natural clock doesn't align with what is expected of you. Does that kind of answer your question or
Yeah, it does. I just have like a follow up of that, because you're doing survey based
yeah,
data collection. One might not know if they are predispositioned to be a night person or a morning
yeah,
person, but they're answering questions based on their just habitual pattern. So, could
yeah,
you speak to like potential biasness or potential other ways to kind of deduce whether someone is answering as a predisposition morning night person, or in comparison to just answering based off their habitual patterns?
yeah. So the loci, whatever you want to call it, actually did a pretty good job with asking the question in such a way that it kind of takes a step away from your habits and more if you had the choice, would you so it kind of tried to get away from those habits like you said and more focus on okay, if all of these rules didn't apply, what would you be doing? And some people, of course, they don't know the answer because they've never been in a situation where that happened. And that is also a limitation of this study is like it's all questionnaire based and that could always lead to some sort of bias. But what is interesting is that it does correlate or it shows similar results as other studies who've done also more broadly um, like testing. So that does show that the loci is pretty validated because it shows similar results as to like clinical studies, for
Yeah,
example.
that makes sense.
Um, yeah, but as I said, it's so hard to get rid of all biases. Um, And, you know, that's why you can take full conclusions out of this, where it's like, no, every evening person has this type of personality profile. That is not what we're trying to say, and that is also not what we can say, because there is always the error, and it is still questionnaire based data. But it is an interesting, I think, step towards maybe something, yeah, more sophisticated or more reliable.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess now that you kind of like open that door, what would be your next study or your next kind of step into continuing this kind of novel research in the area of kind of closing the circle among these three kind of factors?
That I don't know yet. I have yet to come up with a plan. I am very fortunate that I am able to assist on a research project of a PhD student at the Erasmus University. And I'm kind of the bridge between my job and the university. And we're going to do a research with our clients that looks at autism and psychopathy and the overlap between those two. Um, so that is something completely different, but I'm hoping that somewhere in that also allows me to have like a gap somewhere where I can like squeeze in and be like, hey, what about a project on this? Because if it could really help with risk assessment or prevention, then I think it's something worth exploring. I just don't know yet how or what would be possible with that.
Yeah, totally. It's always kind of like you finish one study and you're like, okay, now how do I like take the next step? It always takes a fair amount
Yeah,
of time. But
yeah.
you went through your research kind of pretty thoroughly through your manuscript, kind of breaking it down. But we kind of did it in a very scientific way. What are like one or two points that you can just say kind of to like the overall like average person who may not really understand all these things personality wise or chronotype wise or
Yeah.
anything like this, like what can they just take away from this particular study?
I find that's a difficult question for me to answer. The way I always explain it to people when I talk about this study is that we saw that evening people have more negative personality traits, and I'm saying it because they are seen to be negative. They're not necessarily negative. And that morning types are more likely to exhibit the more positive personality traits. Um, but again, that doesn't mean that for every morning person this applies or for every evening person this applies. Um, but what is interesting is that evening people, I don't know, it's just they are kind of their own type of person. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're a morning person or an evening person. So for the general population, there isn't that much to take away from this, I think, to be
That's fair.
completely honest. Yeah. Um, because, in society nowadays, does it really matter if you're a morning person or an evening person? No, you still have your stuff that you have to get done. But maybe if you notice by to yourself, like I am more of a night owl or early bird, you could always find a way in your own routine to accommodate that.
Yeah, for sure. Like maybe if you notice that you have more energy or motivation in the morning, you can do your workout in the morning and not at night.
Yeah,
Prioritize
exactly.
your high priority things to get done that day in the morning hours and not leave them to night because maybe it won't be done as well or like just some things like that.
Yeah. Or if you're really struggling on your job because it's early in the morning, okay, maybe look for something that is more, to evening work. Um, So I think for the general population in that sense is like do some self exploration on this topic. See if you are more likely to go to bed late, more likely to wake up late. Just notice those patterns within yourself and then see where adjustments need to be made for you to feel more natural. Um, because what I also notice is that some people feel really bad because they can't stick to that routine, but they don't understand maybe why. It's like, well, maybe you're just not meant to be doing these things early in the morning. Maybe you should wait until later in the day to get that stuff done, like you said. Um, so I think for the general population, it's more of a self exploration of like, where do I fall?
Yeah, for sure. I guess that kind of wraps up this episode going over Marit's manuscript that has been published. We'll link it, so if you want to go and read the actual full manuscript, feel free to do so. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you want any clarification, feel free to leave us a message or a note or a comment, and Marit will be more than happy to either answer it or try to find you an answer for anything that you
Yeah,
may
yeah. I noticed that I have become quite dark in the meantime because it's getting late here. Um, well, my question to you, Leah, and I think I know the answer, but are you more a morning person or an evening person?
have. Naturally, I'm a morning person,
Yeah.
but I have noticed through my health journey, because I've had some health issues, that when, especially for females, when things aren't like when you're not healthy, when your body's not healed and it's not working properly on the inside. I was not a morning person. I wasn't an anything person. um
And that's
it
also a possibility. Like it's not either or, it's like some are just in
Yeah.
between.
So I do have to say, and it goes back to kind of like my question on habits, because like I've been a morning person due to swimming since I was 5 6 years old. um, and that continued until I was early 20s.
Yeah.
But I do have to say, even without swimming, like I'm naturally like much more clear and much more mentally sharp earlier in the morning than I am at like later at night.
Yeah.
Um, but then again, like that is just me naturally, without the caveat of health issues, because I think health issues does play a big role into altering what is like quote unquote normal for you.
Yeah. No, it definitely could. Yeah, and then for me, people always ask me, of course, like, well, what are you? Are you a morning person or an evening person? And I always tell them I was a forced, still am a forced morning person.
I can
Um,
attest.
yeah, because with swimming, you have to wake up. For my work, I start at 8 in the morning, so like you have to be up earlier as well. I do notice that I focus a lot better at night. I think if my routine could be like go to bed at 2 a.m. and then wake up at 10 a.m., that would fit me much better than this. But I've gotten so used to this routine now that I wake up in the morning and I go to bed around 10 p.m. But I don't think that is my natural rhythm.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like my natural rhythm would be so confused. Like, I would say I probably have my best focus between 3 and 5 a.m. But that's like waking up and being focused, not staying up
Yeah.
and being focused.
Yeah. Yeah. And then some people, yeah, but 3 and 5 a.m., like that is more morning person because the evening types would be more like 1 and 3
Yeah.
a.m.
That's what I'm saying. It's like I would go to bed at, whatever. Like I would rather go to bed at between 7 and 9 and wake up at 3 versus stay up till 3 and wake up at like 11.
Yeah.
Like couldn't do that. No way.
Yeah.
But I do
But yeah,
think
I
some of
mean,
it is just what you kind of get used to as well.
yeah. Yeah, because that's why I like that you mentioned habits, because for me now it's also a habit to go to bed at 10 and wake up at 7. But if I didn't have that, I would be up later just doing stuff, getting work done, and then waking up later. But this society is just not like, it just doesn't work like that.
I do have a question for the audience because I don't have the answer to this question. Is can your circadian rhythm be changed? Because
It
like
changes, yeah, it changes over time.
but like even like during like just day like not like changes as you get older, but like
Okay.
can you change it? Because like for example, like when you see the sun drop, that's when there's a spike in melatonin. So like
Yeah.
in theory, everyone should be following a similar circadian rhythm
Yes.
because like you wake up when the sun rises, like that
Yeah.
initiates hormonal response for you to wake up, be active. Same when you see the sun set, like that triggers your body to start producing your sleep
Yeah.
hormones, your melatonin, etc. So I wonder, I am curious, which could maybe lead to like your next research topic. I do this for a living. What about outside time? How does outside time, time spent outside, time spent in the sun,
Yeah.
like influence what you think you are, what you are?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when I presented this at the conference, there was a girl that came up to me and she was like, well, could it be, could it have any relation with the equator, where you are, how far you are from the equator? Because closer to the equator, of course, you get way more sun than when you're further. So does that mean that everyone in Finland is an evening person? They're just falling asleep the whole time? Like,
That's what some
so
people
those
said.
are interesting questions. And the thing is, like, can we actually do something with that information? No, but it's interesting to
I
find
mean, I
out.
think it could because I mean, if you're, I think you could also maybe draw some connections. Like this is all hypothetically, but if you're seeing like behaviors, like in kids, for example, because nowadays
Yeah.
kids don't go outside, at least not in the U.S. Um, they're on their TV or on their computer games or doing this, that, and the other. They're glued to a screen. But if you're noticing or that this individual or this youth is exhibiting these like negative evening like behaviors, and you can
Yeah.
and if you can tie that to time spent outside,
Yeah.
what if you can not really reverse their behavior but re-regulate them
Yeah.
to a more positive behavior by just exposing them to sunrise, sunset, time spent outside?
That might actually already be some research on that. We didn't go into that part because we were actually like
Yeah,
just looking at the
yeah, yeah,
personality and stuff.
for sure.
But it sounds like a topic that could have been explored already, because it makes a lot of sense. Chronotype has been widely researched in different areas of study, so it might have already been done. But yeah, it's just an interesting topic, because from one question comes another and comes another, and but that's just how research works.
It is. It is.
But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope I wasn't too vague. If I was, please send me a message and ask me for clarification, and I will be happy to give it. Link also the manuscript so you can read it yourself if you are interested.
Yeah, for sure.
So, see you next time.
See you next